interpreters, and then we're going to get started. So if folks could just give us a couple of minutes. And this is just a heads up for everyone sharing your camera that we're live on the platform. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, Sophie Kabunlang, are you able to join as an interpreter? Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, so as we're getting started, everyone, again, hi, my name is Robin Runge from the Solidarity Center. We are fortunate to have phenomenal women union leaders from all over the world, literally, joining us today. And so we're offering interpretation. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Noor to explain to folks how to ensure that you're able to access your language.
Hi, everyone. So to select your language, select the language you'll be listening in on and hit mute original audio. So if you're listening in Russian, Spanish, Korean is actually Khmer. There is no Khmer option in Zoom, and Arabic. So select your language and then hit mute original audio. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noor. So we have interpretation in Russian, Spanish, Khmer, and Arabic today. Okay. So do we think we should get started?
Yes.
All right. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again. As I said, my name is Robin Runge, and I have the privilege and the honor of moderating and introducing our phenomenal panelists this morning. I'm going to start by introducing each one of our panelists, and then we're going to do a talk show format where I'm going to ask each one of our panelists a question and have them share with us their incredible work that they're doing. This workshop title, as you know, is Women Worker Voices in Participation on the COVID-19 Recovery Front Lines. As we all know, this last year has been incredibly trying, and the pandemic has triggered several crises: an economic crisis, a health crisis, the increase in gender-based violence and harassment, including in the world of work. And also, in addition to that, our sisters, and we'll hear about that from our sisters in Central America, they've also had incredible floods caused by hurricanes. So it's just been an unbelievable year to struggle through for workers, and women have continued to lead, continue to find the way forward and to fight for all workers. And so we're really excited to hear about their work today. So we have 5 phenomenal women union leaders with us. First is Gulnara Derbisheva, who's the director, I am probably not saying this right, Gulnara, I apologize, director of Insan, Leilek, Kyrgyzstan, and she's going to talk about her work with migrant workers in that region and her leadership fighting for migrant women worker rights. Next, we have Iris Munguia, and again, I'm not saying that right. She's going to hopefully forgive me, who is the women's coordinator of the Honduran Federation of Agro-industrial Unions in Honduras. And she's going to be talking about the tremendous work that her union and that she has been doing in the banana sector in particular. Next, we have Rose Omamo, who's the General Secretary from the Amalgamated Union of Kenyan Metal Workers from the Central Organization of Trade Unions in Kenya. Rose has been a longtime leader of that union and also was instrumental in the adoption of Convention 190 to eliminate violence and harassment including gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work by the ILO. And so we're going to hear about the challenges that the union has overcome in Kenya. We have Nadia Bergaoui, who is the General Secretary and Media Officer and Women's Affair Officer of the Federation of Agriculture in the Tunisian General Labor Union in Tunisia. And she's going to share with us some unbelievable work that they're doing to understand better the challenges facing women in the agricultural sector and how that research is being used to improve recruitment and retention of women. And then we have Phalan from the Cambodian Food and Service Workers Federation in Cambodia, who's going to talk about the tremendous work that she and her union are doing on behalf of food and service workers, in particular those workers who are left out when we think about recovery and the needs of all workers, including beer servers and others. So we're really fortunate to have this phenomenal group with us today. And I'm going to start with a question for Gulnara, which is, what are the challenges facing migrant domestic workers? What have the challenges been facing migrant domestic workers during the pandemic? Thank you for being with us.
Спасибо, Робин.
Many thanks, Robin. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'll try to speak further slowly so that the interpreters could catch up. Once again, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gulnara Derbisheva. I've had the lead organization Insan Leilek. This is an organization located in a remote area of Kyrgyzstan for 15 years. We have been working with women for most vulnerable categories, the less well-insured women, and the migrant women, etc. And I would like to explain you a little bit, to give you an insight into the challenges that these women encounter in Kyrgyzstan. I have prepared a presentation which is also available in English. I will be showing it in Russian though, and after we have completed today's work, I will send out to everybody my presentation in English. What I would like to emphasize is that the women of Kyrgyzstan deserve and want a future that will live free from discrimination, stereotypes, and harassment and violence. Unfortunately, these are the challenges that our women face every day, every minute, and it's something that upsets us. We talk about the contribution of Kyrgyz women and to the fight against COVID-19. I'd like to emphasize that we have been following situation together with all the women that we follow. And we would like to declare that the women and the young women in Kyrgyzstan have made a huge contribution in the crisis control, the pandemic control work, and still the discrimination in the labor market, the domestic violence, the problems of the inclusion and the participation and decision making is something that remains a huge challenge. When we talk about the Kyrgyz women, we point out that the women are still very much underrepresented as leaders, as those who lead the political and economic life. Only 12% of women are represented in the national parliament and the National Assembly. When we speak about women being in the front line and in the COVID-19 pandemics, as nurses, as doctors, they're still very much underpaid compared to men. We have tried to calculate it compared with the data that we have received from the National Statistics Committee during the pandemics and in the wake of the pandemics. The women have always been receiving 27% less than men in terms of wages, although they have been they've been carrying out the most harrowing work. Then there is a huge delta, there is a huge gap in wages between men and women. Although women are quite presented in the workforce, on the labor market, and are enough qualified and equally qualified with men. The wage gap remains huge. Yet again, according to the official statistics on the wage gap, we have been following the situation for the last 3 years, and we see the dynamics. The official dynamics shows that the monthly gap between men and women in wage in Kyrgyzstan in 2018 was 20.9%, has grown to 26.3 in 2019, and in 2020, during the pandemics, it reached its historic landmark peak level of 27.4%. We believe that this is really huge and very much indicative of the current situation at the labor market. We know that the most vulnerable people in the labor sphere in Kyrgyzstan are pregnant women, are disabled people, and those who are older than 48. And the most vulnerable women in Kyrgyzstan are those women who work in informal sectors. As we are talking about women and their labor rights, we always point out that women were the first to be expelled from the labor market because they were less paid and more frequently accepting than the men the work without the labor security, the most precarious work. Our center that has been set up together with the Solidarity Center of the Bishkek office of the Solidarity Center, together with Lola Abdukader, we have set up this labor rights of women support center. Only from March till December 2020, we have been contacted by 1,890 women that have been put on the unpaid leave or otherwise illegally, unlawfully expelled. During the pandemics, the women have suffered more than women. According to the poll, women were 5% more to lose the work, and there were 5% of women who have lost their jobs during the pandemics, while among the men there were only 3.5%. The unemployment among young people is very high. Well, amongst the categories of people of middle age, the losses were lesser. So the young population, the youth, was the first to lose their employment during the pandemics. The influence of the pandemics on women, amongst all the problems that we have already enumerated, and in addition to the social and systemic obstacles to the leadership of women, the COVID has engendered completely new gaps and new challenges. This was the highest rise of the domestic violence, the portion of work, unpaid work of carers within the family, and of course unemployment and poverty. We know that in Kyrgyzstan is one of the countries that in the post-Soviet space still has a number of professions, of vocations that is forbidden for women, from where women are banned. The prestigious and well-paid professions are still closed for women. The most prestigious the profession is, the higher the wage is, the lesser the chance for women to access to it. In Kyrgyzstan, we still have a list of those professions where women are banned from. There are around 446 professions where women are nowhere to be seen. There is a large work that has been done in order to abolish such list. Based on the initiative of the local NGOs, the Solidarity Center, and experts, the Ministry of Social Development of Kyrgyzstan has set up the interministerial work group in order to improve the labor law, 2 meetings have been conducted where a number of representatives of NGOs have attended and international organizations representatives, and where we discussed the necessity to either fully abolish such list of professions and posts which are burdened by the notion of particular hardships or particularly difficult work conditions, sometimes totally unjustified, or to keep such list as it is done in other countries, as it has been done in Russia or in Uzbekistan for that matter, where in the NGO sector we are going to fight to the end in order for this list to be fully abolished. And of course, our women, and it is the major challenge that we're facing these days, are those that are faced by our women migrants. 95% of women migrants are moving to the Russian Federation. The poverty, the unemployment, and low wages force our, especially young women, that are very much subject to the marginalization, the social and economic one, to move to the other country, another country, to move abroad. Main reason of migration is definitely the desire to improve the livelihood and to support family. And unfortunately, the migration is the only way, and is perceived as such, to improve the level of livelihood of the family and the comfort for the family. The share of women in migration flow from the Central Asia actually comes from Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan accounts for the largest share. The age categories that is most represented are women from 18 to 29 years old, which account for 20% of all migrant women. These are women that who work at the most low-paid jobs while migrating. We'd try to provide full direct aid to women migrants. We are being contacted by thousands and thousands of those who migrate and who tells about how their rights in the host countries are being violated. And what we are addressing is that for our migrants, the risks of violations, the risks of women and children rights violations are particularly high because they are vulnerable on two fronts, in two phases. The first place as migrants, they face the employment or unemployment, and if they're employed, their host country, most strictly Russian Federation, doesn't provide a labor contract, and the precarious conditions, the lack of the labor contracts, the non-compliance by the employers lead to the fact that, like, we have more than 65 cases when our migrant women have been working for up to 5 years without vacations, without holidays, without weekends. We are being contacted by the migrant women who work as taxi drivers, as couriers, as wild berries, who are employed based on the civic contract rather than a labor contract. And this is the sort of a subterfuge for employers that allows them to sanction them, to deprive them of all guarantees, social guarantees that are set out in the Russian labor code. Only through the pandemics from March to December, our lawyers have been addressed by 268 women who, with their statements on violation of labor and human rights. What we also face and what we observe is, especially those who are active in the labor movement, they face particular threats. 2 years ago, men and women migrant workers have set up the migrant trade unions that has been registered in Kyrgyzstan. Today, this trade union enumerates 16,000 members, and our women migrants who are in Russian Federation currently, they are all observing the illegal detentions by the law enforcement of the Russian Federation. In 2020, in February 2021, in the course of the meetings that have been organized to support Alexei Navalny, a number of people from the trade union have been detained, although they had nothing to do with the demonstrations. Then our women have also pointed out the harrowing conditions of detention for such women. More than 566 women have contacted us on these particular problems. And when we are addressing the challenges that are faced by women migrants, around 60% of them don't have all necessary papers that are required by their destination countries because they haven't prepared themselves, they haven't done necessary paperwork prior to their departure. Sometimes and oftentimes the decision to move to a country are being taken at the very last moment without necessary preparatory work. Yes, another challenge for migrant workers is the very low sexual literacy, as we call it. The non-acceptance of contraception and contraceptive means is something that is very frustrating indeed. In addition to that, our women migrants also run such discrimination risks as psychological, physical, and sexual violence. Based on the statistical data from January 2020 to February 2021, 456 women have contacted on about these particular challenges. And then we point out the problems that they face abroad, the fact that they don't have any decent dwelling. They are deprived of any access to the medical care and medical insurance. They have very little access to justice in the destination country, and the low level of access to any defense of and protection of their labor rights. This is something that may be not of the great importance, but when we talk about the observing the social distances and all the other requirements associated with COVID, our migrant women have mentioned several times that have been detained for a while in Russian Federation, and as far as the sanitary conditions are concerned, there was no respect of any distanciation rules in the places of their detention. And we have been talking with the independent trade union and the Russian Federation in order for them to address an ombudsman at the Russian Federation for those minimal and basic rights for the women migrants that have been detained in the Russian Federation to be respected for alternative ways of detaining them will be secure, and where the distancing, where the access to minimal food, hygienic products, etc., would be secured. We would also like to point out that the places of detention host our women for very minimal negligent violations, such as the lack of papers and the inability to produce a particular paper, or for instance, the migration card that would have expired. As far as the recommendations are concerned, in order for us to not just to do the lip service and to propose something in terms of cooperating with the local government, with the civil society in both Kyrgyzstan and Russian Federation, we are advocating, we are lobbying for our national authorities to develop the gender-oriented and based on the women rights policy in the field of migration that would recognize the active participation of women in migration processes and would like to move away from the image of a woman as a victim. Would like to see our women as migrants as strong individuals capable of protecting and defending their rights. And I would also like to to develop the concept for the state migration policy till the year 2005, take into consideration the aspects of women migration. We would also like to propose, and we are working on that, to enhance and to provide for the articles that would provide for the necessary supervision of over the working conditions of the women migrations on the part of the all services concerned. And we are working hard in order to remove obstacles that limit the ability of migrant women to become members of professional unions, to become parts of association, or to participate in collective bargaining in their with their employers. Last thing I wanted to point out is we are now working a lot with the coalition of the NGOs and trade unions that are dealing with advocating women's rights. Since 2019, we have been promoting the labor rights of women and the fight against discrimination, violence and harassment. We have been also trying to advocate the adoption, ratification of the Convention 190 in our parliament. These are the samples, the examples of materials that we are disseminating. We've also carried out a number of studies that have been discussed with international experts, because unless we keep them informed, unless we keep advocating, we will be in a standstill. A number of conferences, roundtables and seminars have been organized, and now as we're addressing the convention, the ratification, the convention of 190, the most important thing for us is, as a result of the joint work of the NGOs and the trade unions, Kyrgyzstan, we are proposing amendments to the labor code, which would ban any harassment at workplace. And Ministry of Health and Social Development of Kyrgyzstan, a meeting was held where the amendments to the labor code has been discussed. And we're also now set out the right for everybody for the personal integrity and secure work conditions that would be free of harassment and other norms that create for a worker of any sorts of interference in his or her work. And we're also very much hopeful that the convention will be ratified by Zhogor Kokenish, by the Parliament of Kyrgyzstan. And once again, we are trying to work hard on abolishing the list of the professions from which the women are banned. This is all from me. Like I said, my presentation is available in English, and I'll be willing to answer to all the questions as they arise. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sister Gulnara. That was incredibly informative and inspiring to hear about the work that you have been leading, really, and just to hear about the struggles during the pandemic and the advances that are made and the advocacy for ratification of C-190. So thank you so much. Next, we're fortunate to hear, and I should have said at the outset, we're going to have time for questions at the end, so please save your questions. Next, we're going to hear from Iris Munguia, who's the Women's Coordinator of the Honduran Federation of Agro-Industrial Unions in Honduras. And my question for you, Edith, is what is the multi-pronged approach to preventing and addressing gender-based violence and harassment that your union has been undertaking, and especially during the convention? Really the multi-pronged approach to preventing and addressing gender-based violence and harassment, including pushing for ratification of C-190. And how has that struggle looked during the pandemic? So Edith, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be participating in this event, and I'm grateful for the invitation. And for me, it is a pleasure to be sharing with all of these women who, in one or another form, are working on the same type of work, the same efforts to improve the quality of life for millions of women. I'm going to try to give a brief summary of the situation of women in agriculture, and particularly the women who are affiliated with FESTAGRO, which is the labor union. As we've seen, the pandemic of COVID-19 and the two hurricanes that we had here in Honduras in November, we can highlight some consequences at the national level and specifically in the agriculture sector that we work in, and particularly the banana sector. We can say that one of the consequences that has come has been an increase in unemployment. Women here, compared to 2019, had 8.1% less work, and that compared to men who only lost 4% of work. And we have more than 4,000 people active, and many are working in the informal sector. In the informal sector is where most of the women are working, and you know that in this informal sector there is no social protections, there's no social security. The work that women do are in the streets and small businesses. And so it's an incredibly precarious type of work. And another problem that has happened as a result of these factors that I've mentioned is an increase in contamination. There have been caravans of people looking for better opportunities, particularly for the United States. And people are desperate for work. They're suffering a lot of violence, and so there are many caravans of migrants rather. And here, in terms of health, there have been people who have died waiting for an appointment, or even in the doors of a public hospital because of COVID-19. And so that has to do with the health system. And the other clear problem is the incredible corruption. In the last 2 years, we've seen how at the government level there's corruption linked with drug trafficking, and the budget that was destined to take on to cover needs of the pandemic has been turned into corruption at hospitals and in terms of distribution of medicines. And another thing that's given us a lot of concern as women is that we've seen an increase in violence. Last year, in 2020, that in the public ministry, you talked about 50,000 denouncements based on the C-190, and we want to get to zero, but there's been more violence against women. In addition, in the first 2 months of this year, between January and February, there have been more than 30 women assassinated. And the most sad about this is that there are no investigations for these murders. And these crimes are left in the status of impunity. And this worries us tremendously because there are no guarantees that there will be any kind of reprisal taken against the responsible parties of these murders. Another concern that we have is there's been no increase in our salaries, and in the basic sub resources that we need to have the basic needs for our families, so we have to have the tools to disinfect ourselves when we come back, like disinfectant and masks, and the cost for all of these products has increased. And this has to do with our salaries. And the canasta básica, which is a sort of a basics a subsidy, has after the hurricanes, the businesses have increased the cost of things, and which makes it harder in terms of the distribution of the canasta básica. And in the terms of the hurricanes, there was no response by the government to help people who had been affected. The hurricanes were in November, but we still have people living in the streets and cardboard and nylon, and people who are still living in this way. And some of our women colleagues were very affected in the communities where they live because they lost their homes. And these women are living with family members or renting. And so this takes me to another point. The banana plantations inundated, and in the company where we work, almost all of the plantations were inundated. And so women are suspended from work. More than 400 women were suspended from working. And in all of these consequences that we've had because of natural phenomenon and the pandemic, the people who've experienced it most are the women. But I'd also like to say that as the Federation, we've been working a lot on the work of against gender-based violence and harassment, and doing as much as we can for women. And we're trying to be more involved with the structures of the areas of work, because we know that in the majority of the leaders are men. And so we try to incorporate ourselves and participate actively in these leadership activities of the union. And we've been working hard. And the first thing that we did in this banana sector in Honduras was to do a diagnosis of how are we as women. And we started to work on a participation of women to understand how are we in the labor conditions, and how are we in terms of health conditions. And so with the participation of women in the unions, we do the work of leadership and talk a lot with women on specific topics. And little by little, we've been training our companions, creating structures of women and creating statutes in the syndicate, in the unions. And there are women at the secretariat level, and they've gotten to leadership positions of the union. And so we're trying to make sure that women can participate in the labor negotiations. And we want for women to be able to participate in these negotiation opportunities so we can bring our proposals and requests about employment and to see how we can have women who can be in collective negotiations and that these clauses have benefits for the women and that these women who go to the negotiations understand these clauses. This type of work is what we've been working on to incorporate more clauses that benefit women more directly in the collective negotiations. In terms of labor conditions, as we've been working in small groups and through these mechanisms, we've been able to learn a little bit more about the conditions and particularly in relationship to the pandemic. And so as women have shared their realities, particularly the lack of fulfillment of equipment, of protective equipment by the companies. And particularly, they've signed these protocols with ensuring this protective equipment. And there is this agreement, but the companies are almost always out of compliance with these agreements.
¿Verdad? Con este tipo de implementos, ahora andar una mascarilla en una planta empacadora donde trabajamos y las temperaturas son bastante altas, ¿verdad? Entonces todo esto son inconvenientes que tenemos. En cuanto a la salud de las mujeres, en cuanto a la salud de las mujeres, nosotras aquí, ¿verdad? Tenemos muchas compañeras afectadas con la cuestión de las actividades repetitivas. Con esto de las actividades repetitivas, las mujeres padeciendo mucho de túnel carpiano o
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we've lost the English interpretation.
La salud de las mujeres, ¿verdad? Entonces,
so we have a lot of problems associated with the exercise of repetitious tasks, carpal tunnel problems, shoulder problems. So we have been working on a specific solution so that we can get a list of problems associated with the women's repetitive motion problems. And we are going to send it to the company. And last but not least, my dear colleagues, I just wanted to share that regarding Convention 190, starting last year, we had the opportunity of working, from February to October, we were able to start working on a campaign of awareness with male and female colleagues that are leaders in their respective unions. We started talking to them about Convention 190, and also we started exploring collective bargaining to understand if they have any clauses already about gender harassment. That's the work we've been doing, and our approach has been two-pronged. Even though it's true that Convention 190 is very necessary and we're fighting for it to be ratified, we are also trying to work on it bilaterally, seeking to negotiate with companies by getting content from the convention and inserting it in the collective bargaining process with these companies. We try to include some clauses with content that is already reflected in the Convention 190. For example, the fact that female workers should be in an environment free from sexual harassment. So we've been including some clauses to that regard, and you could call what we're doing as the creation of some model clauses. These clauses we bring to the companies, and then we propose that they include them in their contracts. Something else we're doing is that from the internal point of view of unions, we need to carry out some reforms in our statutes so that we are union movement that guarantees that women are free from harassment, sexual harassment, because we are not going to turn a blind eye to the fact that this happens too amidst our organizations. So we've been working on this, knowing that some clauses want to correct behaviors within a company, and some of these clauses are have the intention of modifying this behavior within the union. We have to keep fighting this fight. And there's also something else I wanted to say. All this work we are able to do because we're part of a union. I've said it again and again. All the women that are managing to do things are managing to do them because they're part of a union. We have a great advantage by being unionized because at least us, whenever we face a discrimination, whenever we face harassment, we can report it, we can denounce it, we can talk about it. So we have a chance. We have an opportunity, and that opportunity is there because we are part of a union. It's not the same being in part of a union that not belonging to one. Women who are not organized, their lives are subject to worse conditions, both in the workplace and in other places too, because the man knows that if that woman doesn't pay attention to him or doesn't give in to him because she's not protected, it's only a matter of time that he keeps doing the same thing every day until she gives. So I think that the situation needs to be carefully evaluated. It needs to be known that belonging to a union has great advantages. Last, I wanted to say that in terms of the work that needs to be done, I think that's very clear. We need to keep fighting tirelessly and constantly, figuring out new ways of fighting, new ways of working to keep organizing female workers and also male workers. We have to make sure that all of them are organized so that their living conditions and working conditions are improved. They need a collective bargain. And something else we need, and is that even though ratifying Convention 190, is important, we also need to find find ways of implementing that with the companies that we work with. I think that's a great opportunity. I think it's a golden opportunity for women to get involved in this negotiating processes so that we can present these proposals, because that's our one chance to create an environment, a healthy, completely free from sexual violence environment. For example, the bargain we have with Chiquita, we have a clause that forbids harassment on Chiquita sites, and now we're talking about making a regional clause. That clause would apply to all the plantations where Chiquita would be producing, meaning in Panama, Costa Rica, and Honduras and Guatemala, where Chiquita is operating. If we manage to implement that clause on a regional level, it means that all these places would be protected, not just in our country. With that, and that clause is the fruit of very hard labor, the fruit of women's hard labor in other spaces, also working with the coalition, Colsiva. We spent many years in Colsiva working alongside women from all the region in Latin America, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru to get to this point. Something else that I think belongs in our agenda is the fact that the pandemic is here to stay for the moment. At least for the foreseeable future, is going to be a condition. So I think we have to put in more work to figure out how to live with it and how to counteract the stigma that some of the people that have COVID or have had COVID suffer. We need people to be informed, and we need people who are suffering COVID symptoms to get the attention they need. Very often, people not because they want or just because they don't know how to treat someone else. Sometimes we end up discriminating against others, and I think we need to fight that as unions. We need to learn how to better manage the situation when someone gets COVID, so we can be sympathetic and we can be helpful. So I think that that's the work we're doing here at the Federation. And that's, I think, what we need. We need to
Thank
keep
you.
advancing in this fight so we can benefit all the women. We've done a lot, and we've made a lot of efforts to improve living and working conditions for women, all always through that collective bargaining. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I am here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, that was just so inspirational. I just want to lift up one of your key points, which is that it's only because these women are in a union that they're able to raise their voices and to affect change, to address the impacts of the pandemic and to effectively address sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence and harassment. It is only through collective action. And I so appreciate you raising that and really pointing out that we know that women workers are safer when they're in a union. It's being in the union that really makes that possible. So thank you so much for sharing with us the remarkable work that you're doing. And it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Rose Omamo, who's the General Secretary from the Amalgamated Union of Kenya Metal Workers of the Central Organization of Trade Unions in Kenya. So she's with us. And I should have been saying this, all of these folks are from all over the world. And Rose is joining us from Kenya. Thank you so much, Rose. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Robin. It is with great pleasure that I sit here today to also share with colleagues on the areas of the impact of COVID-19 in Kenya and what the trade unions are doing, and especially the women trade unionists, what they are doing to make sure that we mitigate COVID-19 to our members who are the workers. I'm sorry, my camera is a bit not very well, but I think you can all see me well. And I want to start by saying that COVID-19 pandemic has really worsened the situation for women at various workplaces, and it has constrained access to various facilities, especially health facilities for women. Women have really suffered a great deal when it comes to access to health facilities. It has further worsened the existing inequalities between male and female in employment. And as I have said earlier, really access to facilities has been a problem. And the reason why I'm saying that it has worsened the existing inequalities is because we know already that there has been inequality between men and women. But at this time of COVID-19 pandemic, the women have suffered because they are so vulnerable. You find that most of the work that they do has been precarious because most of them are either casual workers or contract workers, or they do some non-standard forms of employment, and this has really, exposed them to some advances that really they do not want to, but then because of the situation, they have to get into those. And again, women both employed and employed, those in informal settlements, and even those informal settlements are now facing various numerabilities, because most of them are either on salary pay cut, some of them are maybe working alternative days because of the effects of COVID-19 in their companies, and some of them are not working at all, they are on unpaid leaves. And again, you find that during this time, the restriction of mobility for families have really affected the women, because it now makes them become pure caretakers. We know that there have been caregivers, yes, but now during this time of the pandemic, the situation has even worsened. So you find that majority of the women in informal and formal establishments are now, most of them are jobless. Those who are in businesses cannot operate anymore in their businesses because of the current pandemic situation. And some of them that used to maybe travel from one place to another to purchase goods and services cannot now do that because of the restrictions with the government in regards to COVID-19 protocols. And this has really affected a lot of women. In that situation, I can tell you that cases of gender-based violence has increased, and social protection mechanism cannot cope with the current situation. The women are suffering. We see that there is a lot of tension within the families. Those tensions have increased more than they were, because initially men were used to, taking their time out, but now there are curfews that restrict their movement, and they have to come back home early. And because there are no proper income, domestic violence is rampant, especially here in Kenya, and I believe that maybe in other African countries or even globally. And so you find that violence against children too has also increased, because when the father comes back home and he has nothing, no food to put on the table, he extends his violence to even children. So these are some of the things that has really worsened the situation of women and in Kenya, and those that are working in formal or in informal setups. And you find that most women are asked for sexual favors because most of those jobs that they used to do that are casual, that are not regular, now during this pandemic, you are asked for sexual favors for you to get employment for those casual employment. And this has really worsened the situation of women. And a large portion of women are really suffering right now. And you would find that the issues of finances has become scarce, and it doesn't impact in men the same way it impacts in women. And so unions are also reporting a lot of layoffs for women, especially those working in the textile industries, those working in the plantation where my sister has just shared about, and even those working, you know, in those kind of setups. Dismissals are more on women than for men. So we also see that women have faced challenges of teleworking. Some of them, when the children were at home, you would find that they are the people who would take care of the children. They would be like teachers in the house. They would do everything, and this has really affected women. I can tell you COVID-19 pandemic has impacted much on the women than on men. And you find that on the other hand, business cycle have also used this excuse to you know, say that they do not have work, and therefore they deny women the right to work because they feel that the smaller work that they have, they want men who have a lot of energy and who can work even 12 hours or 13 hours in a day. So women are denied their right to work. So in regards to the issues that I have mentioned, I would now come to try to tell you what we have done in Kenya as women and what we continue to push for. Given the fact that we have been so much affected as women, we have tried as much as we can to ensure that the gender and age is considered in the context of reproductive health, so that women workers, those in formal or in informal employment, can access accurate information on COVID-19, access a good information on their health, on their reproductive health, and also we ensure that women are empowered to protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections, especially during this time that women are asked for sexual favors in exchange of jobs. We have also ensured at central organization of trade unions level to ensure that that social protection programs respond to risks of gender-based violence and mitigation approaches. We make sure that there are guiding and counseling for victims and even for women at large in regards to gender-based violence at workplaces and even at homes. Because I shared with you earlier on that domestic violence has been rampant, gender-based violence has increased in the country, and now as workers' representatives, and especially women representatives and gender champions, we ensure that social protection programs respond to risks of gender-based violence and mitigation approaches. So we also have ensured that we have gender-targeted programs that build more on gender-responsive, equitable workplace, taking into account the vulnerable state of women and the disproportionate effect that COVID-19 has had on women. we at the Central Organization of Trade Unions have also ensured that we train women, young women, through the Young Women Roundtable, which is a mentoring program, a mentor-mentee program that we have here in Kenya between COTU and Solidarity Center. We make sure that we train women to negotiate clauses in their upcoming CBAs that reflect violence and harassment at workplace, and that will ensure zero tolerance to violence and harassment at workplaces. And in this, we encourage them to borrow leaves from Convention 190, because that convention has very good articles that women can use to negotiate for in their collective bargaining agreements that would protect them from violence and prevent them from violence and harassment at workplaces. So these trainings are ongoing, and we are making sure that we train the women on article by article of Convention 190, and to make sure that we also give them a broader understanding of that convention together with the recommendation 206, so that during their negotiations, they be part and parcel of the negotiators, and they make sure that they push for clauses that would protect them and that would provide zero tolerance to violence and harassment at workplace. Again, in that same area, we also ensure that during this time, we are lobbying and we are campaigning for ratification of Convention 190, so that during this time of pandemic that the women are undergoing a lot of frustrations, a lot of stress, a lot of job losses, we can push together to make sure that this convention is ratified so that it can be domesticated and it can become a law in this country. We are also trying as much as we can to encourage social dialogue, and this is where we bring the Federation of Kenya Employers together with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, and we all talk of mitigation protocols for COVID-19, and to ensure that the employers can provide cover for COVID-19, because right now in Kenya, National Social Security Fund has refused to cover COVID-19 cases. And this now impacts so much on women and young men, because now without the cover, if you are affected, then it means that you die, you are on the death. And so as women, we are saying that the employers must make sure that they provide cover for COVID-19, but also to ensure that in all that they do, the health, safety, and health for the women and the men in their workplaces must be guaranteed during this COVID-19 period by ensuring that there is 100% adherence to COVID-19 rules and regulations. I think those are basically some of the things that we are doing, Robin, and we are committed to the task. But before I end, let me also tell you that we have formed a gender champion team in COTU, whereby we have identified young men, about 10 of them, and the young women, about 10 of them, and the 20 have been trained in addressing disputes that are related to C-190, and they are up to task, and we are really pushing that disputes that are related to gender-based violence, to sexual harassment, are addressed amicably, and we have a team that is very young, very vibrant, and ready to work with us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sister Rose. And just to elevate one of the key points that you made, in this moment. I mean, you made so many, but one that really stuck with me is in this moment of thinking about recovery from COVID and its disparate impacts on women, people have been talking a lot about the extension of social protections, right? To make sure that they're getting to all workers, including informal workers. But you make a key point, which is social protections need to be changed to be reflective of the needs of women, right? That is really critical. And sadly, you highlight that what we know is there has been an increase in transactional sex during the pandemic. It has always existed, sadly, in our workplaces all around the world. We know, sadly, that many women are forced to have sex with a supervisor or a hiring person to get or keep a job. That's what C-190 is designed to address. And sadly, it has increased during this COVID time. And so it is critical to make sure that social protections provided include reproductive health, right? And reproductive health around sexually transmitted diseases, because it's a workplace issue. It's a workplace issue. So I just want to thank you for highlighting that really, really concrete, specific example. And I'm so excited about the next generation of leaders to fight against gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work. Thank you, sister. So we have two more sisters with us. And so I'm going to turn to our next union leader, Nadia Bergaoui, and she can say her last name for me better, who is the General Secretary, Media Officer, and Women's Affairs Officer of the Federation of Agriculture Tunisian General Labor Union. And we're thrilled to have Nadia with us today. Thank you so much. And Nadia, if you could please describe a recent research that the union has undertaken regarding the working conditions for female agricultural workers in Tunisia, and what we're learning from that, and how that is really critical to be focusing on even during this time of the pandemic. And if I could ask you to try to keep your remarks to about 7 minutes, that'll give us time to make sure that we hear from our sister Tellen, who's here from Cambodia as well, who's up late in Cambodia. So thank you so much, Nadia, if you want to take the microphone.
صباح الخير، مساء الخير.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak about the experience of women workers, especially in the agricultural sector. My name is Nadia Al-Bergaoui. I'm a member of the UGTT, the Tunisian General Union in Tunisia. We have around 800,000 affiliates. I'm the Deputy Secretary General, and I'm in charge of media and women affairs office within the Federation of Agriculture. I'm also in charge of the development of women capacities in the agricultural sector. I would like to say that the agricultural sector plays an actual and important role in the economical sector in Tunisia, and the percentage of women participation is important. Most women work in the informal sector with 43%, with very vulnerable and precarious working condition. There is also an absence of social security and medical insurance, and there is also a prevalence of violence in its different forms. During the COVID-19 pandemic, women workers in the agricultural sector are in the front lines, and unfortunately, they have not benefited from a dedicated health protocol. They have been working without taking good consideration of the consequences of this pandemic on their health and on their families' health. So they didn't know about this lethal virus, and they only had a helmet to cover their head and didn't have any masks.
And as part of our collaboration with the Solidarity Center and with our representation in the agricultural sector, which is based on the values of treating workers fairly and presenting them with opportunities for decent work. And we have conducted a study in October 2020 within the framework of a project aimed at improving the hiring and employment conditions of workers in the agricultural sector in Tunisia by improving their transportation conditions. And the aim is to first diagnose the situation of women and present the recommendations that would upgrade their transportation conditions, them being a vulnerable segment of the workforce. And this study was conducted in 6 provinces in Tunisia, and we have found out that there is over 203 women out of about 400 respondents, or at least 63% of those women are faced with some kind of violence. There's economic violence with women not being paid equally compared to men, and 51.7% of women have declared that they have faced a form of either material or verbal violence. And agricultural workers have also indicated sexual harassment or other forms of sexual violence, although they've been reluctant to state what it was exactly, given the cultural traditional background. And even if there are legislations, including Law 51 of 11th June 2019, which relates to the conditions of the transportation of agricultural workers, the laws are not really implemented. There's also a lack of social protection, with 100% of these workers saying that they don't benefit from social security coverage, even if they do face different occupational hazards, including lethal hazards, so much so that the transportation vehicles that transport them are called in Tunisia as the vehicles of death. As part of the findings of this study, we have been able to prepare and design awareness campaigns for these workers, for NGOs, and for our own union workers, in order to sensitize them to the importance of speaking out for their rights and make them aware of those rights, rights to equality, equal treatment, equal pay for equal work, and for their right to organize and to fight against harassment and violence in the workplace, and also to speak out for better transportation conditions. And this has been done, of course, under the aegis of the UGTT, which is the Federation of Unions in Tunisia. And we have used different tools and instruments in order to convince the workers as to the importance of improving their working conditions. And we have done so by developing a video that contains actual life testimonies of working women, and it has been circulated on the website of the UGTT. But I think that the culmination of our research work is the building of a strong coalition with the Federation of Agricultural Workers and the NGO fabric in Tunisia, in addition to the involvement of local and national authorities of competence, in order to bring together our efforts in order to improve those conditions. Such a coalition will help us implement what we have set up as part of our strategic plan at the very beginning of this research initiative. I would like to state here that we are going to continue to work in order to upgrade the working conditions of women, and to push for the ratification of C-190, and to fight against all forms of violence in the world of work, and to focus more specifically on agricultural workers that are affiliated with the UGTT, and to make sure that they have union chapters in the various governorates of Tunisia in such a way as to enable us to negotiate with the Tunisian government to reinstate the rights that they've been deprived from. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nadia. You just packed an enormous amount of tremendous information in a really short period of time. And I so appreciate that. And the photos of how the research work was conducted were really wonderful, and of the women workers. And it's tremendous to learn about how that's going to improve working conditions, as you pointed out, for women workers, but really for all workers in transportation and elsewhere, right? What we know is when we really focus on the needs of women workers and improve conditions for women workers, all workers benefit. And I just want to pick up what you said about the continued advocacy for the ratification of Convention 190, and announce that our sisters in the region, and I know, Nadia, you know this, I should let you announce it, our sisters in the region, in the MENA region, the Union sisters and brothers are coming together and are going to be putting forward a petition to the UN and in the Generation Equality action coalitions, demanding that governments ratify C-190 and inviting unions from all over the world and NGOs from all over the world to join them in this call. So look for that, everybody, soon, and please urge our union sisters and brothers around the world to follow our sisters in Tunisia, in Morocco, and elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa region. And sign the petition. So thank you so much, Nadia, for your wonderful presentation. I know I have questions after each one of you speak. So we're fortunate and so lucky to have Tepelen with us, who is up late in Cambodia. It's the middle of the night there, and so we so appreciate you. She is from the Cambodian Food and Service Workers Federation in Cambodia, and you know, my question for you is, how has the pandemic impacted women food and service workers in Cambodia? And how is the union advocating to address those impacts? Thank you so much. I'm turning it over to you, sister.
ចាសូមអរគុណចំពោះក្រុមការងារ ASIL and I'd like to thank ASIL for inviting us as a speaker from the food and service sector in Cambodia, and to share the issues related to women in this sector. First of all, I'd like to inform the brothers and sisters about the work that has been done by CFSWF. We actually have workers from the entertainment sector, and mostly they are women, those who work in the karaoke parlors or beer promoters, or those who worked in the pubs, that is where people drink. And second, we have workers from the food and beverage sector, including Coca-Cola, as well as Carlsberg, and we is locally known as Onco, who are also our members. And we also have the general service workers, including voice collector, and mostly they are female workers. For the general service workers, including Chevron, petrol station. Regarding the general situation of our workers, we know that, and through listening carefully to the speeches by our sisters on general issues, I think the situations are similar. However, I'd like to share one experience from Cambodia, and in particular those issues which are the challenges for women. COVID-19 pandemic has a greater impact on the women, and in Cambodia, the main sector, which is the garment sector, is impacted the most. Also, the service sector is the second sector which promotes the economic growth in Cambodia. When COVID-19 pandemic hit Cambodia, we are also facing the challenge of the ABA, that is the everything but army was removed from Cambodia, and it has an impact on the government sector that is about 20% of the export. So at the same time, we were hit on both fronts, and as a result, female workers lost their wage. And as you can see, the union was established in 1997 when the labor law was enacted. So we actually fought hard for the right, actually to use their right at the workplace, or the rights of the freedom of association. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, our rights were violated easily. Employers use the opportunity to exploit the system, and they were preference by the government. Actually, the government issued some regulations in favor of the employers. And the employers did not bear the responsibility to deal with the impact by COVID-19, except the last month salary. So the workers were not protected at all in this instance. Second, Cambodia is now facing the community outbreak. That is the third wave of the community outbreak. And Cambodia actually, the government announced the closure of the entertainment sectors. And for each announcement by the government is concerned that the COVID-19 may spread, but the government failed to look at the basic needs, the food, the daily food of our workers in the entertainment sector. Their workplace usually is where they stay at night. And when the government declares the employers shall close the sector, the areas immediately, then they had to be moved away. They could not find a rental accommodation. They do not have the money with them to rent a house, or sometimes they face the difficulty to actually to return to their native villages, because usually they don't have the place to go to, since they actually rent their house or land in order to get the money to come and work in the city. In the announcement by the government, it failed to mention that the employer shall provide the wage to the employees when it is to be shut down. So with the irregular income, as well as with this issue, then they are faced with the immediate loss of income. And the third issue is on top of the loss of their employment, and if they feel sick, they need to go to the hospital, and they were discriminated. They didn't receive any health protection in this instance. When the employers close their facilities immediately in the entertainment sector, most of the employees have not yet registered in the Social Security benefit because of the lack of the direct contract with the employers, because they are commission-based workers. So when they have health issue, they have to go to the hospital, then they were discriminated. And they were discriminated also because based on the facts that they work in the entertainment sector. And also they don't have any income to provide for the medical treatment. They also face the lack of money to buy any food. In addition to this, they also have to pay debt, that is to pay the loan fees. to those who they loaned their belongings, including their mobile phone or their identity card, that so that they can get some loan money from a private sector. And of course, the interest in this private sector is very high, that is 20%. And when they lost the work, they don't have the ability to repay the loan or to get back their mobile phone. And if there is a case, then it means that they lose the mobile phone forever. And when the some employers actually secretly opened their entertainment facilities again because of the demands of the customers. So our female workers return to work, but then they are not protected by anything. Sometimes they had to work for 12 hours to receive a meager tip from customers. Also, their age is a factor. They were discriminated against because of their age or because of their physical appearance. Then there is an opportunity for the employers to discriminate them. They were screened. Only young, beautiful female workers would be selected to work in the entertainment facilities in this instance. Also, in this entertainment sector, we have a lot of challenges. And one of them that we received from our female workers is the discrimination against pregnant women. It's because of their belief, that is, they believe that if workers are pregnant, it means that it's a bad omen for their business. So they require the female workers to actually examine their urine to see whether they are pregnant or not. They have to do that on a weekly basis. And if the test shows that they are pregnant, then they would be sent home. And if they want to work only when they are not pregnant. So in this instance, the woman wants to maintain working. They do not dare to go to the proper hospital because they feel ashamed. Then they would take a tablet for the abolition, for the abortion. And then sometimes they take the tablet today, the abortion tablet today, and next day they return to work. And that actually happened before the COVID-19 pandemic. And it became rampant during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And when violence exists, the employers who are the restaurant owners or the karaoke parlor owners, they do not protect them. They always say the customers are the king for their businesses. And by seeing these kind of situations, the union tries to push the government to include the female workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, so that they are able to receive allowance, so that they can live, in particular to fulfill their basic needs and food. And second, it means that they also have the equity card or the pool ID or card for the women workers in the entertainment sector. Usually, they were discriminated because they said that they don't need to have this pool ID card because they work in the entertainment area. They dress nice when they go to work, and they believe that they earn more money, so they do not need the pool ID card. So they are deselected from this ID card, the pool ID card system. The third point that we propose to the government is to extend the loan repayment schedule because they do not have what to do. They have to mortgage their home or their land, and usually or sometimes they have to borrow the money from the bank to buy a motorcycle or to buy a rickshaw for their husband. And when they lose the job, it means they lose everything. Then they face to be discriminated, and their mortgage may be taken by the bank. So we actually ask the government to consider this issue. And actually, we put aside a proposal to the government again and again. But unfortunately, the government still exclude them, and they're still being discriminated. And we actually compare this to an emotional song that can convince the government to include them into some kind of social protection. We try our best to do what we can, but still they are not included in the system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, because I know I would like to listen to more of what you're sharing. But unfortunately, we're over time, and this platform shuts down automatically at 10:40. But thank you so much. And I really want to elevate, Teppan, some of the key points that you made about the exclusion from social protections, the exclusions from all these systems that you described, and the advocacy that the union is doing is tremendous, right? And the different forms of discrimination that women are experiencing in your sector is just unbelievable. So I just want to thank all of our speakers today for your tremendous sharing, and I wish we had more time. We have recorded this program in all of the languages, and we will be sending out those recordings so that you can share those with your colleagues and your unions and distribute them. So we will have this recorded in Khmer, Russian, English, Spanish, and Arabic. So thank you.